Hello everyone, my name is Kelly Ibanez, and I will be describing how to implement the Expanding Expression Tool, also known as EET, with children with expressive and receptive language disorders. Let's get started. So exactly what is EET? EET is a program that was created to expand expressive descriptions, both verbally and written, using manipulatives that come in a package that engage multiple sensory modalities. So in a moment, I'll show you exactly what comes in the EET pack so it makes more sense. Using EET, children learn to make associations between some ideas that are represented by the manipulatives and how they can use these ideas to expand their own descriptions. A speech-language pathologist's job is to guide the children in using EET so that it goes from being adult-directed to student-directed. So how does EET work exactly? Well, speech-language pathologists teach students that they use these circles to expand their own descriptions. So we'll go over each one because that's the way we would teach our own students how to learn EET. But basically each circle is called a bead because there's an actual string of beads that we use to help them learn what each category is. And children figure out that each bead is a color or maybe a different material, and that represents a different idea. So green is group. Children touch the green bead or point to it on the picture and make the association that green is group. And then they decide, okay, so what group does an item belong to? If we were describing a watermelon, for example, they would say, okay, green group, a watermelon is from the group food, and so on and so forth for all these items down here. The point is that each of these manipulative items has an association, and that students learn to use these associations to expand their written and oral expression. What exactly comes in EET? If an SLP buys EET, they'll get an entire box, like this right here, that has a manual that teaches them how to use EET, that has the map that we just used that goes over what each bead stands for, and that also has this giant string of beads that kids get to use and hold and figure out, oh, okay, so there was a visual representation, but there's also a physical representation of EET. As children learn each one of the items, they also get to hold a mini version of the map right next to them, and there's even really tiny versions of the beads that they can also hold while they figure it out. In addition to these basics, there's also a set of dice, so that as students figure it out and really generalize what each of the beads stands for, they can roll the dice and come up with whatever the dice item is. Say they roll blue and blue is dew. If they were describing a watermelon, they would take it from this and say, okay, so I rolled dew, you eat a watermelon. There's also specific images of each of the items in EET so that speech-language pathologists can really hone in on specific items that some of their students might be having a difficult time with and teach them in unison. So maybe they'll start out with the group one, and once that's mastered, they'll move on to the do one, and so on and so forth until all of these are mastered. EET also comes with a Rolodex of images, as seen here. These are used to really practice describing items by also using the map and the beads and the dice. Here's this bigger close-up image of the string of beads that come with EET. It's kind of cool to see it up close so you can understand that it really is across multiple senses. Kids can learn by touching, they can also learn by seeing, holding it helps them. It's just a really great mnemonic device to have. Now when I say multimodal, I mean it. I mean that kids can engage most of their sensory modalities by using EET, which is great because if you're working with a child who has an expressive language delay or disorder, they tend to be kids who have a harder time learning in general. And if we can tap into other senses other than just their hearing, this could really help them to expand their expression. So as this girl is doing here, they can touch the beads. They can look at the beads. They can look at the pictures that are on the map while also holding the beads to figure out how to use it. They can roll the dice. They can use a structured handout that has images of the beads along one side and space for them to write. Or they can do all of the above. There really are no limits to the use of EET. So since I've told you what comes in EET and kind of how you can teach it, let's practice going over it. I've included the entire map of what every bead stands for, and we'll practice going over how we can use EET to expand a student, say someone who has an expressive language delay, how to expand their expression. If we think about what we tend to do when we sit down with our students, we might just say something like, all right, let's describe a pizza. But if they don't have anything in front of them that they can touch or see, it might be harder for them to generate ideas. The children who have expressive language disorders tend to have a really difficult time accessing semantic knowledge that's stored in their brain. So if we can give them something that can help them access it, that's great. So again, if I was not to give them anything, a student might come up with an idea like, well, a pizza is something that you eat, and if prompted, they might even say it's something that tastes good, but usually they need more assistance in coming up with items. Otherwise, they wouldn't be seeing the speech-language pathologist. In addition, some of the children that I worked with when I did my student teaching in LUSD would only come up with a single response. They might even just say, pizza is a food, and that's it. So let's see how we can use EET to truly expand expression. If we were to isolate each bead and teach them, it would go something like this. We would show the students green and say, okay, green is a group. What group or category does pizza belong to? They might be able to say food, and with some prompting they could come up with, oh, it's Italian food. You might not agree that it's Italian food or not, but the point is that they're able to look at an item and make an association with it. So if they're holding the green bead and know its group, they can look at the pizza and think, oh, pizza's category is food. And that's really great because these are the children who need help building associations. The next category is blue, which represents do. If we showed the picture of the pizza to our students with expressive language disorders, and we said, okay, blue is do. What do you do with a pizza? They might be able to come up with the idea of, well, you eat it. And since it's our job to show them how to expand the expression, we might have to provide some additional cues to get them to come up with more ideas, such as, well, you can make a pizza, and specifically, how do you make a pizza, or what do you do to it to make it? Then they could say, oh, you put toppings on it, and you can talk about all the different toppings that the students can put on it. You can say specifically you bake it in an oven, and you can even say you can smell it to engage other senses, and you blow on it because it's hot. These are all ways to expand not only the description of the pizza, but their semantic knowledge and associations between other words that are related to pizza. If we were to be teaching I, what does the item look like? We would take the I bead and show children to think about, okay, we want to think of what size, shape, and color the item we're describing is. This is a really great bead, especially for our younger children, because they may not even realize that when we're thinking of what something looks like, that we can use descriptors that talk about size, shape, and color. It's a very concrete basic skill that a lot of our students with expressive language delay need to build. And so if we were to lead them through it and say, okay, let's look at the pizza. What size is it? They might say, well, you can get a pizza in many sizes. And then they can come up with the different sizes. If they were to come up with the shape and say it's round, we might even prompt them by saying that the entire whole pizza is round, but what about the parts? What about the pieces? And then maybe they might say they're triangular. That would help build a semantic concept of size, part versus whole, that sort of idea. If we were to talk about the color, it's possible that they could say that the sauce is red and the cheese is yellow, but it would also open up the option of talking about the toppings and talking about different toppings that can go on top of a pizza and the different colors and tastes and smells associated with each one of those. So again, this bead, even though it's talking about what does an item look like, it really leaves a big open space for kids to fill in the blanks. And this particular slide is great because it's also broken down into smaller parts, the size, the shape, and the color of an item. And these are things that we really need to focus on teaching our students to think about. To move on to the wood bead with our students, we would talk about what is the item we're describing made of. So here we would say, okay, class, what is pizza made of, or what's it made from? And from there, they could come up with these sorts of things: sauce, cheese, dough, and toppings. Similar to the wood bead because it goes into the parts. So if we're talking about a food, the parts are probably similar to what it's made of. And here again, so we'd say dough, crust, a sauce layer, and a cheese layer. But if we were talking about something a little bit different, say a car, we might be able to get the students to actually talk about the parts. Again, EET is great because we're not just teaching kids to come up with new words. We're expanding their access to semantic knowledge. And we're expanding their syntactic structures by saying, okay, let's look at these different things and let's come up with different responses and let's generate new categories and let's generate new connections between categories. For this bead, the white one, we talk about where. So where do you find it, or where would you use it and see it? Students might say, oh, well, you find a pizza in a pizza shop or an Italian restaurant. And if they don't come up with the next idea of, well, it's anywhere you can eat food, the SLP can really generate that with like a leading question. And then it's up to the students to come up with all the different places that they can eat foods. So they might say home, in the kitchen, in the cafeteria, in a mall food court. They might even say that they had seen people ordering pizza and it being delivered to a park or a basketball game. And that's great, because that shows that they're able to become more flexible with their thinking. What's really great about EET that's shown by the white bead is the fact that it also teaches students how to answer WH questions, like where and what do you do with an item. And that's another core skill that our students tend to have a difficult time with, is understanding how to answer these questions. So EET not only expands expression, but also teaches children how to think in different ways. The final bead that's on the EET strand is the orange bead with a question mark, which represents what else do I know about the item I'm describing. This provides students with an opportunity to talk about prior knowledge they have or fun facts that they know about an item. So if we're talking about a pizza, students might say that they had seen people making pizza throwing dough in the air, and that might stimulate another conversation that would be interesting to them. Or they might even talk about different types of pizzas by saying, oh, well, in New York City, there's thin crust pizza, or in Chicago, there's deep dish pizza, and pizza's totally different in Italy. Again, this is also teaching a WH question. What else do we know? So EET expands expression by also expanding the ability of students to answer simple questions. Everything I just showed you was done orally. So we know that EET can expand expression verbally if we're having a conversation and trying to describe something to our friends, but I didn't really explain how we could use it in writing. So here's a concrete example of how a student used EET to expand their written expression. If you look on the left here, we can see what the student came up with when asked to describe a football before they used EET. And they had a lot of single words, 2-word phrases, and 3-word phrases, but that was it. They really didn't generate novel information that was a lot deeper. It was just the color of an item and what you do with it. But when they used EET, look at how much more they had to say. Look at how expanded their writing was. It went from single words to sentences to even paragraphs, which really is great because, again, the point of EET is to expand expression. And what does it matter if we're only expanding written expression? These students, as they go further and further in their careers, are going to have to figure out how to write better. And this is a really big part of an SLP's job. Now that I've shown you the basics of how to teach and use EET, I wanted to also show you how SLPs are using it across the country. So here's an image of what a speech-language pathologist posted on her blog. She made personal EETs for all of her speech clients. And the kids were able to put these beads on the keychain and wear it with them so that they weren't just using it in the speech room, they could also generalize it to their actual classroom and at home, which is important because if our students aren't generalizing what they're learning in speech, it doesn't matter what we're doing. So these kids were able to hold on to the beads and touch them and use them while they were writing on actual class assignments, which hopefully helped them. SLPs also use a number of games when using EET. So for example, headbands is a big game that SLPs tend to use, and students can use EET in conjunction with that by holding an image on their forehead and then looking at a friend who's doing the same thing and using EET to describe the images so their friends can guess what was on their forehead. You can also do games like What's in the Bag, where one student knows what's in the bag and uses descriptive words to describe it, or other children have to ask the questions to figure out what's inside the bag. There's also an image at the bottom left of an app that can be used with EET, and at the bottom right is memory, so students figure out how they can describe items when they turn them over. My personal favorite item to use with EET is caribou because it's very motivating for students. So you can put pictures on top of the caribou box and have students describe them before they're given an opportunity to open the boxes. And this is great because it shows them that they can use descriptions to get things that are motivating to them, and it's not just motivating for their teachers. If you want more information about EET or would like to purchase it, it can be found at www.expandingexpression.com. And if you look at the picture below, you can even see a scene of a speech-language pathologist using EET with her students. And this is a cool picture because it shows that the SLP no longer is directing the session, the students are. And if there's anything we know about speech-language pathology, it's that if our students don't learn how to direct themselves, they're not going to generalize it. So EET is a great way to work with our children who have expressive language delays and disorders and teach them how to expand their own descriptions and make associations between words that they didn't have before. I hope you enjoyed my presentation. That is all for today.